Bone broth is amazing and our blood sugar loves it, so follow along as I make it. In order to make a really good bone broth, you need bones. Beef bones, chicken bones, and they have to be raw. And you also want things like onion and garlic. And you brown everything in something like butter because butter means flavor but also healthy fats. We also add apple cider vinegar because, hey, more health benefits. And we cover everything in water and bring up to a boil. Now, we don't boil it forever. We just bring it up to a boil. Once it's boiling, we cover it and turn it down to low and simmer it for up to 8 hours. You could do this overnight. You could do it during the day. I'll leave that up to you. When it's ready, it will have this nice, deep, rich color, and then it's time to strain. Now, before you pour it through a strainer, take out any of the big bits, just makes it easier to strain, and then pour through a fine mesh strainer. And then store in mason jars for up to a week in your refrigerator. It's pretty amazing. I like to have mine every single day to start on a savory note because blood sugar loves it. I add chicken or I add leftovers. I mean, it's great. If you want more blood sugar balancing tips, you are in the right place. Follow along.
Would you like to make almost 10 liters of beef bone broth? Well, I'm going to show you how. We're going to roast the bones first because I think it makes it more deep and rich in flavor. 425 for 20 minutes. To my Instant Pot, I'm going to do 2 tablespoons of salt, 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar to help bring out the nutrients and break down the bones, peppercorns, bay leaves, and some dulse. Dulse is a seaweed and I add that for additional nutrients and minerals to my broth. Fill the water to either cover the bones or underneath that max line in your Instant Pot, and we're going to do high pressure for 3 hours because it's beef. If it was chicken, I would only do 2 hours. Like with any broth, after we've simmered, we're going to strain and then put it into containers. I'm going to save the bones because you know what we're doing here. We're going to make a second batch with those bones and reuse them. And thank you to you TikTokers who have taught me that the term is called a remoulage when you do a second batch. Whenever I do additional batches, I only do the salt and apple cider vinegar because the dulse and the seaweed and the peppercorns are still in there from the other rounds. 3 hours later, we're good to go. And again, I'm going to strain and then I'm going to pour into the containers. Again, though, I'm going to save these bones because they're not quite brittle yet. I'm going to do a third round at 3 hours. I'm going to even show you here as I grab one of the thinner bones to show you that there was still a lot to go and these bones definitely aren't brittle yet. Now, with any time that you're doing multiple batches of broth, each batch is going to get weaker and weaker. And that's why in the back you see here that I'm not fully filling up those containers. Every batch that's done, I'm adding a little bit to each container so each one has the same identical flavor. The bones that made up this batch of broth included the beef marrow bones that you saw I made whipped bone marrow in my last video. And I also have just been saving beef and even lamb bones every time we eat it at home into a gallon bag in the freezer. These will be good for up to 2 weeks in your refrigerator or 1 year in the freezer.
Making your own bone broth at home is actually a lot simpler than you may think, so here's how I like to do it. I just added a bunch of beef bones to a large stock pot and covered it with water. Brought it to a boil to take out all those impurities and then poured off that water. I then washed off the bones and refilled the pot with some fresh water. Then I added in a bunch of aromatics, some celery, some onion, bay leaf, and some parsley stems and parsley leaves. And then I just let it simmer. And you want to let this simmer on low for at least 12 hours, and you want to be skimming off any fat or impurities that come up to the top. And you can always top it up with more water to keep your bones submerged during the cooking process. And then 1 hour before I'm ready to strain the broth, I love to add a bunch of fresh ginger, some ground turmeric, and some black pepper. This is optional, I just love a really gingery broth. And to strain it, I just take out any of the big bones and then strain it through a fine mesh sieve. And then I just jar it up and keep it in the fridge until I'm ready to drink it. If there's any congealed fat like that, you can just scrape it off once it's cold. And it should look nice and jello-y. And then I just heat some up in the morning, and it's really a nice way to start your day.
Here's how you can make bone broth at home. It's packed with lots of nutrients, high in protein, collagen and minerals which offer tons of health benefits. Start by blanching the bones. You can also roast them in the oven for a deeper flavor. Adding vegetables and spices also enhances the taste and adds additional nutrients. The apple cider vinegar helps to draw out minerals from the bones. I used my Instant Pot, so it only took about 3 hours. After the bone broth is done, strain and pour into glass containers. I froze half of the batch and kept the rest in the fridge. You can drink it on its own or use it as a soup base for any dish.
Here's how I make the most gelatinous bone broth. Yes, so gelatinous it passes the Dairy Queen test, which is $10 worth of bones and 5 minutes of effort. Fill your pot with bones. I like beef marrow bones and chicken feet. Cover with filtered water and add some salt. Then pressure cook it for 2.5 hours. Once it's done cooking, strain it out into a glass jar. And the best part is you can redo this process again with the same bones and make a giant batch of bone broth to last weeks. Get the full recipe in the caption.
I have recently been drinking bone broth every single day for my joints, for my bones, also for my gut and my skin. So if you're interested in learning how to make bone broth, let's get started. 2 pounds of chicken feet, 3 chicken carcasses. Roast these at 400 degrees for 30 minutes. Then place it in a pot. I'm drizzling in a little bit of apple cider vinegar. Just enough water to cover the veggies and bones, herbs. Bring it to a boil, then cook it on low for 10 plus hours. Strain the broth, and I was able to fill up 3 of these 32-ounce deli cups. A batch lasts me for about a week, and I store it in the fridge, but if you're storing it in the freezer, it should last about 3 weeks. And every day I scoop out a cup and microwave it for 2 minutes, put in a few pinches of salt, and this is how it should look like.
Please don't make this mistake when making bone broth. You might not be fully absorbing all of the collagen benefits. I see so many Western recipes telling you to strain your bone broth and just drink it straight, but in Chinese medicine, bone broth is always recommended to be eaten with other ingredients, so your body can be prepped to absorb the nutrients. So next time you're making bone broth, start by blanching the bones first, then stew for 2 to 3 hours until you get a milky broth. At the very end, add in radish to cook another 30 minutes for its hydrating and anti-inflammatory properties, and I highly recommend adding in some ginseng root for its additional immunity boosting benefits. Enjoy with rice.